Hello. So I'm doing another 10-minute video diary, and today's topic is in fact the podcast by Quillette, a online journal, and they have a weekly podcast. Today's topic is by psychiatrist Tanveer Ahmed on his new book, In Defense of Shame. And he was interviewed by the editor-in-chief, Claire Lehman, and I found it very interesting because they talk about basically well, obviously, Tanveer Ahmed is he's a psychiatrist, so he does tend to talk about the history of different psychological movements, which I find is good to know because sometimes we just kind of grow up within a certain cultural era thinking that this is how the world is and this is how the world has always been, and without that kind of idea on the history, you don't understand that in some ways, just because psychology is like any other field where there's possibly a lot of things that they kind of know, but there's also a lot of other things that they haven't figured out. And in some ways, I would say, because it's to do with people, it can be even less easy to generalize. Like I'm sure there's some things that are possibly like set in stone knowledge, but there's a lot of other things that maybe it's just a theory that's not actually true, and has this whole complicated link to culture. And it's kind of, he talks about how, Eastern versus Western culture and like this positivity movement that went on which has somewhat influenced people from potentially my generation to have to not be able to tolerate negative emotions as much. And I personally think that this is exacerbated with social media because I think, depending on the type of social media you use, I'm finally starting to understand the difference between, say, Reddit and Facebook. And I was thinking about this the other day, and I really think Facebook is kind of like that superficial persona view of yourself. Like it's basically an online representation of your persona. And then Reddit is like the underbelly of the monster. It's like where everyone just kind of goes and throws their like actual thoughts and insecurities and all this stuff, and that's kind of like representative of our internal experience, whereas Facebook is just like this external view of us. And I think it is like, so it just feels so much better to look at Reddit, because you really realize that like everyone's dealing with stuff, and it just gives you like some perspective on things. Whereas when you're on Facebook, also Facebook has just become like such garbage because like people are just like sharing memes all the time, and I just find like the homepage is just like garbage, like with the ads and everything. And it's just like, even for me, I added like an add-on to my browser to block the homepage because like I don't want to see all the stupid memes and all that, and I just find like Reddit so much more interesting. So now I just have Facebook to like once in a while go share a status, which I tried to make them kind of thought-provoking, and then I use Reddit to have like actual discussions with people. And it just, I don't know, and I've always found like Instagram, and I just like don't have Instagram, but yeah, Instagram's just like, I find a lot about, kind of showing off your external persona to people. and kind of like showing off your life, and like, you know, you're kind of tempted to always just share the best things that are going on in your day. Like the moment you have something like positive and cool going on, you're like, I'm gonna share it on social media. And then it just, you know, and I think that's part of the positivity movement, is that, you know, the moment you share like something like kind of negative, then it's like you're like a victim. It's like, you know, like let's say you share like you had a shitty day, like all this stuff. It's like people don't want negativity, you know, like we want to get away from people who are like downers, you know. And it's just like, how can life is not some like superficial positive bubble thing, you know, like we're all struggling in some ways. And I just think that, and then in the interview they talk about, you know, shame, how, I don't know, I think shame is related to that, to all the stuff I was just talking about, because what happens is that if you make negative emotions shameful, you know, and oh yeah, they were talking about how like because we don't have a proper way to kind of express shame and then integrate it as a group, like you kind of express what you're ashamed of to people, like a confession, and then you kind of get like, I guess, forgiven, or like you have to integrate it after, right? So you kind of like face the shame, you say it, integrate all that. Like we don't have mechanisms like that as much. So now like shame is popping up in these like really unhealthy ways, like cancel culture, or I guess self-harm with teenagers or something. So there's like, because shame is still there, you know, it's not just going to go away. All of these negative emotions, we've had them for the longest time, you know, but we're still not able to grapple with them. And I think if you have a movement or kind of a culture that is like so focused on positivity and wants to kind of repress negative emotions, then what happens is that people who grow up in that culture, when they feel really negative emotions, they're going to be ashamed of themselves. And that's kind of related, like they were talking about how you know, shame versus guilt. So guilt is like just feeling individually guilty about something you do, whereas shame, there's an added component where people saw you, like you're kind of, there's an added like social component that it's like, you know, you did a thing, and not only are you guilty for like doing that thing, but you feel ashamed because like you kind of decide that you're a bad person because of that thing. And who gets to decide who's setting the standards of what's a good person or bad person? In some ways that's like culture and society, right? So so that's it. So, and just because you don't have, like, you can feel shame at home alone, and a lot of it also has to do with like the internet, where a lot of our social culture has like been moved online. So you kind of have like a online audience, or even in your head, you can just like, you know, the social norms, you know, in your head. So you can feel shame just because you have like this weird perception that people are gonna know what you're doing and what you're feeling, even if like nobody saw what you did or knows how you're feeling. You can still feel shame because you know in the culture that feeling these really negative emotions is like not considered typical or like correct, you know. So I think that's where shame comes in. And I've started to realize this about like the vocabulary we use. So another really interesting thing in the podcast is that he finally defined what mental health is. Like mental health is like this huge buzzword, but like what does it even mean? You know, it's just like so abstract. It's like we like you just like no, like nobody's given enough depth. Like everything that, so many things that we learn are like so superficial. So like you learn all this stuff and it's like you have like this very superficial understanding about stuff, like 2-second instant gratification. Oh, mental health, that's a thing, whatever. But then like when you're alone, you're faced with like the like complication and deepness of what it is to be a human being. So how the hell are you supposed to understand the depth of what it is to be human and your internal world with these like superficial buzzwords? You know, like, people need to understand depth, like the details. So what they talk about is like, he finally defines mental health as like 3 different realms. And somebody's like, I should look this up myself. Like, maybe it's just me, maybe other people have looked it up detailed, but like, as someone who like already has like a certain interest in like psychology, I've finally started realizing that these terms that I've like heard for so long, maybe they're totally not actually what I think they mean. You know, like, so mental health, apparently it does touch like 3 realms. So there's like neuroscience, behavior, and then like psychoanalysis. So like kind of dealing with like those more like primitive emotions, you know. And it's like, those are 3 solid physical things, you know, that you can like make sense if you think about them. Whereas mental health is like this like social media stupid term that it's like, okay, how am I supposed to understand like what mental health means? Like, if you talk about behavior, that I can understand, because like, it's obvious, like, the actual acts you do in life influence like how you feel about yourself, right? Like, that just makes sense. And then like neuroscience, that's something that's like scientific. It's about like the actual chemicals and processes that are in your brain. So it's like a physical thing that you can like think about. And then like, I find like psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, these more instinctual feelings, it's a little more abstract, but that can be like brought back to, you know, the fact that we're like being in evolution for like billions of years, and we started off as like really primitive beings. So it's kind of like almost like the study of evolution and like the relation to our emotions and everything. So I find all of these things like so fascinating, and they make it like that, like mentioning it like that kind of is like, oh, I actually like want to understand this, not even just for myself, like just to understand it in general, because it sounds interesting. Whereas like when you say mental health, it's just like, I just find like it doesn't give any context. It's basically a useless word. Like, I just think it's just like useless. So I was happy he defined that. So now I have like a better understanding of like what can I actually look into, also just from a purely like intellectual standpoint, not even just like to cure myself of anything. And then, yeah, like one more thing is that I've come to the understanding of like how knowing what these terms mean is so important, because for example, I just find the psychology people, they need to be more responsible with how they define terms. Because for example, you see so much of like, get a therapist for anxiety, like, you know, solve your depression, solve your anxiety, like, you know, like they kind of like take these words and make it like, it's like so stigmatized and just like, so like, your anxiety, you need to solve it, like you need to like get rid of this anxiety thing. And it's like nobody defines what it is, like how it's totally normal to feel anxious at times. And I finally, like, for years I always saw like feeling anxious, and this all ties to the positivity movement, is like anxiety has been given such a bad rap, you know, it's been really associated with like having some sort of disorder or something. And if people would just like talk about it like it's not necessarily a disorder, because now that I finally decided to face moments where I feel super anxious and try to understand why am I actually feeling this way, rather than like, oh, I'm feeling anxious, I'm weird, oh no, and then the shame comes in, and then you feel like fucking weird and like nobody's gonna understand you and all this stuff, you know. I finally started to like try to, okay, wait, why am I, maybe there's a reason I'm feeling anxious. And then you look at the thing and then you realize like, well, I'm feeling anxious because like I have like 3 days to finish this entire project, which is like so complicated and has so many elements to it, and I've been working on this task, which is not advancing for like a whole day, and I have all these other small tasks that I need to do, and I thought that I could like leave it for the last minute, but it turns out that like if you combine the time it takes to do all these like small tasks to finish the paper, then that's going to require just as much time as like the more complicated unknown task. And it's like what I had to do to try to like figure out why was I feeling that way, I had to go for a run. And then my brain figured out like, Julia, you need to stop doing that hard task that you're not moving ahead, and you need to do a bunch of small tasks which you know you can do, so you have a sense that the project is moving forward, so you have a sense that you're going to meet the fucking deadline because you need to meet the deadline. Okay, like that's why I was feeling that. And that has nothing to do with having like a mental disorder. It's just because there's a fucking thing I need to do and it's not advancing the way I need. You know? And it's like, if we just understood that like having feelings of anxiety is not bizarre, it's your deeper self telling you like, come on, do your thing, come on. It's your deeper self telling you like, you need to be doing this because you have standards and you want to do your shit good and you don't want to be a fucking wreck, then that's fine. Listen to yourself. Like, pay attention to yourself. Listen to yourself. Don't go like fucking binge watch a show and try to avoid your issues. Deal with your fucking issues. You know? And I just like we're just in this culture of like, escape your negative emotions by like having a mental health day or like finding a friend and talking about it. It's like, no, what if you did the thing that's actually making you anxious? What if you fucking did it? You know, like just do the damn thing. Don't avoid it. Like do it. And I just think like what that would require is to tell people to their face, you're feeling anxious because you know in your deep self that you're not doing the best that you can in life, that you're not pushing yourself and you're living a meaningless life. And sometimes people need to be told that, and it's tough to hear, but you know, you need to sort out your expectations in life. And if you're happy with the life how you are, then that like the life that you're living, accept it. Accept it. But if you're feeling anxious, it's probably because you haven't accepted it and there's something more that you want. And figure out that thing and sit down and figure it out. Don't avoid. And that's what people need to be told. So I just think that in that front, we're seriously failing people, like, and that kind of makes me lose respect for psychology even as a field, because like this whole thing of like, I'm gonna solve all your issues, it's like, okay, going to a psychologist is useful and I think there's utility to it, but I also think that at some point you need to confront your issues yourself and you need to confront them head on, you know. And we need to have that, like, I know for myself that the psychology stuff can become a crutch. You know, it can really be like, I'm going to go to this person and they're going to tell me exactly what I need to do. But sometimes what you need to do actually requires, what you need to do to solve those emotions is actually to do the thing that's making you feel that. And nobody's going to do it for you. Like, you have to do it, you know? And I think that that's what people need to hear. Like, a little bit of tough love, you know? And if you know that there's like no other way around, there's no way to avoid it. There's no getting away from it. You know, all the medication in the world, all the like comforting hugs, all that stuff is not going to make the thing go away. The only thing is to face it. So that's what I have to say about that. And I think that's pretty empowering. And it always, like, it does remind you that you have to take any field with a grain of salt. Because most of the time, you know, the world, there's plenty of aspects in society where people don't know what the fuck they're doing. And who's to say that you don't know a better way? Like, who's to say that you're not smart enough to know an alternative way? And that requires, like, almost like trusting, you got to trust yourself more than the world around you in the end. And I think it's like building that trust, you know, like fostering that trust in yourself. So that's kind of the journey I'm on. Spiritual journey. And yeah. Okay, so have a great day. Bye.